When you meet someone and everything just works, you hold on to that, you protect it, because good relationships aren't as common as people pretend they are. That's where I was, almost a year in with someone I genuinely loved. No constant arguments, no games, no walking on eggshells, just two people who actually liked each other, laughed together, trusted each other. There was only one thing that didn't sit right with me. His best friend, a woman I'll call Tammy. I want to be clear, I didn't dislike Tammy because she was a woman in his life. I'm not that person. I've never been threatened by female friendships. What bothered me about Tammy was something quieter than that, harder to name. It was the comments. Little ones, the kind that don't sound alarming on their own but add up over time like small drops of poison in a glass of water. He told me he's not sure he's completely over his ex. I don't think he sees this going long term, but don't tell him I said that. He seemed really off after you two talked last night. Every time it was just the two of us, she'd plant something, a seed of doubt, a crack in my confidence, and then she'd smile and change the subject like she hadn't just said anything. The thing that made it so effective, I actually liked her. We had become close, which is exactly why I kept ignoring every instinct telling me something was wrong. There was also something else I learned early on. Tammy was still close with his ex, the woman who had cheated on him, the woman who had moved away but from what I could tell had never fully let go. I always suspected Tammy was working on her behalf, running interference, keeping the door open just enough. But I had no proof, so I stayed quiet, stayed friendly, and kept watching. Then came the night that changed everything. Tammy and I went out, just the two of us. Drinks, music, the kind of night that felt completely normal on the surface. At some point, I blacked out. I want to pause here because I know how that sounds, and I need you to understand I am a type 1 diabetic. I know my body. I know exactly how alcohol affects me, and I know how to manage my limits. What happened that night was not normal. Something was wrong from the inside out, the kind of wrong that doesn't come from one too many drinks. The next thing I remember is waking up in my own apartment, in my own bed, fully clothed, on top of the covers, next to a man I barely knew, someone Tammy had introduced me to that night. I'll call him Peter. Tammy was standing in the doorway, and she looked furious. Before my brain could even process what was happening, Peter explained what had actually occurred. I had been violently ill, throwing up, completely incapacitated, and Tammy, my supposed friend, had left me alone with a stranger she had brought along herself and then driven home drunk. Peter had stayed because he didn't feel right leaving me alone in that state. He knew I was diabetic. He was genuinely worried about me. He slept on the other side of the bed, fully clothed, and waited until morning to make sure I was okay. After he left, I was still so sick I ended up in the hospital. I tried calling my boyfriend from the hospital, no answer. I checked my call log and realized I had tried calling him multiple times the night before too, in the middle of everything. He hadn't picked up, he was likely asleep. But here's the detail that stayed with me. My phone had been in a drawer. Not on the nightstand, not in my bag, in a drawer, hidden, and I have no memory of putting it there. When I finally got home, my boyfriend had packed my things and left them outside his door. He had blocked me on everything. Tammy had already gotten to him. She told him I had slept with Peter, that I had been all over him all night, that she had seen it with her own eyes. None of it was true, not a single word. I was devastated, but more than that, I was furious. Because I knew what had happened, I just couldn't prove it yet. So I started building my case quietly. I went back to the bar, talked to the bartender, someone I knew, asked her everything she remembered about that night, who I talked to, how I seemed when things started going wrong. I tracked down Peter and asked him to walk me through every detail he could remember. He confirmed nothing happened between us. He also told me Tammy had been acting strangely all night and that when I started getting sick, she hadn't called for help, hadn't called my boyfriend, hadn't called an ambulance. She had simply left me with a man I barely knew and driven home drunk. And this is the part that tells you everything you need to know about Tammy, she drove back. Later that night, she came back, claimed she was checking on me, and then left again, drunk, twice. Why would you leave someone you cared about in that state, go home, and then come back in the middle of the night? Unless you needed to control what the scene looked like in the morning. I talked to everyone who had been there that night. I gathered every account I could find, and the more stories I collected, the more Tammy's version began to collapse. Details didn't line up. Her timeline made no sense. People were describing things she had never mentioned. Meanwhile, Tammy was feeding me a version of events that kept subtly shifting every time we talked. She told me she had only told my boyfriend that she saw Peter and me in bed together and wasn't going to lie to him. As if that was the honorable thing to do. Eventually, my boyfriend and I started talking again. I convinced him to give us another chance. And the moment that happened, the moment I walked back through that door, Tammy's mask started slipping. She saw me on the doorbell camera the first time I came over and immediately texted him asking why I was there. I saw the message with my own eyes. As we talked more, really talked, the inconsistencies started surfacing. Things she had told him about me that weren't true, things she had told me about him that he had never actually said. He was starting to see it. She had been playing both sides for a long time. But he still wasn't fully convinced she had gone as far as drugging me. He still wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. So I decided I needed something concrete. One evening, I asked my boyfriend to give Tammy and me some privacy. I set my phone to record, and I sat down with her, completely calm, no raised voice, no accusations, and I asked her to tell me her version of everything from the beginning. She started talking, and then she started tripping over her own words. Details changed, the timeline shifted. She contradicted things she had told me just days before. The more she talked, the less it held together. I told her calmly that I knew she had been lying, that I knew exactly who had told me what, that I didn't want to be friends with her anymore. And then I said nothing else. I didn't tell her about the recording. I wanted to see what she would tell him about our conversation first. Because here was my thinking: if she lied about a conversation I had recorded, then everything else she had ever said became provably false by extension. She went straight to him. She told him I had threatened her, that I had told her I would hurt her if she didn't change her story, that she was scared for her safety. My boyfriend was conflicted. He told me Tammy didn't feel safe with me in the house, that if we were going to keep seeing each other, it would have to be at my place for now. He said he believed me, but that things had gotten too complicated and he needed to create some distance from her. It wasn't enough for me. I let Tammy keep talking. For 2 more weeks, I let her spread her version of events to the entire friend group. I let her get comfortable. I let her think she had won. And then I sat my boyfriend down and pressed play. He listened to the whole thing. The calm conversation, my measured questions, her story shifting in real time, the contradictions piling up, and the complete absence of any threat from me in any moment of that recording. He was silent for a long time afterward. He had already been pulling away from her, already questioning things, but this was different. This was her voice in her own words, caught in a lie about something he could verify against reality. If she had lied about this, something small, something I had proof of, then what else had she lied about? Everything else, it turned out. He moved out immediately, came to stay with me while he found somewhere else. We told the friend group what had happened and played the recording for the people who needed to hear it. And Tammy, she did nothing. No defense, no explanation, no attempt to fight back or rewrite the narrative one more time. She went quiet, she moved out, she stopped returning messages, and eventually she just disappeared from everyone's lives entirely. She had talked herself into a corner she couldn't get out of, and when the recording proved it, she had nothing left. The most satisfying endings aren't always the dramatic ones. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting someone expose themselves and then making sure everyone was watching when they did. My boyfriend and I just celebrated 4 years together. Our relationship is genuinely happy, built on something real. And Tammy, she gave herself the worst punishment possible. She erased herself. That's the story of how a woman who tried to use silence and lies as weapons ended up being destroyed by her own words. If you made it to the end, thank you. These stories take time to find, time to write, and time to tell right. If this one stayed with you, subscribe. There are more where this came from.